Cute animals, people, flowers, all of these good things look great on camera, but do they look better on a DSLR? Or do they look better on Apple's latest iPhone 11 Pro? You know, there's only one way to find out, and we're gonna dive into a deep comparison, and you're coming with me. Let's go. Hey guys, how you all doing? Really, that's just great. You know, I'm doing pretty great today too because I have my friends with me, Canon and iPhone 11 Pro. They're really the only friends I have. So, Apple updated the camera system in the iPhone 11 Pro and in the iPhone 11, and it's pretty remarkable. But can it replace a DSLR? There's weak points and strong points. Let's take a look at them right now. And you may be thinking, Ken, this is a totally unfair comparison. Yes, of course it's an unfair comparison. I'm not trying to say what is better because I don't really think anything is better than anything else. It's very subjective. I'm just showing you what the differences are. Come on, let's take a look. We're gonna look at optical image stabilization for video, small details and noise, dynamic range, portrait photography, then a little mystery surprise that will test your skills, so stick around for that. Then we'll finish off with night mode and some other low-light photos. So to start with, I gotta say, the optical image stabilization in the iPhone 11 Pro is stellar. Here is me using the iPhone 11 Pro next to the Canon DSLR here. I did notice when I took a closer look at it, there was sometimes a little bit of a jerking motion, and I believe that was the autofocus kicking in. I tested it again with the autofocus disabled, and I didn't notice the jerking motion. So keep that in mind if you want to do a nice dolly handheld shot. Turn off the autofocus, and then everything will look great. And even just looking at this video, you can see the dynamic range is so much better too. You don't get all those blown out details like we did with this particular DSLR. Now mind you, different DSLRs, different mirrorless cameras, different cinema cameras will all handle dynamic range differently. But in my case, these were the two things I used. But now let's dive into something else. We're gonna take a look at the small details and the noise. So on the left, I have a photo taken with the iPhone 11 Pro, and on the right, a photo taken with the Canon EOS 7D Mark II. Now I'm putting the metadata here for the settings that were used on each device, but keep in mind that stuff is relative as well. ISO 200 is gonna perform very differently on a DSLR than it is on an iPhone. iPhones use pretty low ISO. The focal lengths were also the same, give or take a millimeter or two. So the focal length is really small on here because it's a small lens, but the effective focal length is about 50-ish. But now let's zoom in and look at some details. I scaled these up in Photoshop by 300% using a nearest neighbor resampling, which means all the pixels are scaled proportionally to preserve the detail. It's not doing any tricks to try to soften or enlarge stuff. It's all consistent. On the iPhone 11 Pro photo, you'll see that we're getting a bit of an impressionist painting effect. My friend Delta calls it that. And that's probably because of the noise reduction and some of the other processing that the automatic camera settings inside the camera app are doing. So you'll notice we don't have a lot of noise and grain in the iPhone photo compared to the DSLR photo, but we're getting that kind of blotchy painting look instead, and we're also getting a bit of a fringe around those flower petals. So we're losing a good amount of detail in those small little areas. On the DSLR, we don't lose that. Yes, we have a little bit more noise, but that's relatively easy to correct with a little bit of noise reduction. On the iPhone though, we lose some of that quality. Here's another example with a different flower, and you'll see if we zoom in again, you'll notice we get a bit of that splotchiness and the details just aren't as fine. This one looks quite a bit better than the other one. Now, I just want to make a note here. You may not see the full quality of this stuff over YouTube compression, so there is a link in the description where you can take a look at these slides in full res, PNG, like beautiful Ultra HD quality. So go ahead and take a look at that. Also, I do want to note, when it comes to the DSLR, I was using all manual settings except for white balance. And when using the iPhone 11 Pro, I was using all the automatic settings because I wanted to test out how Apple's brain in the camera works compared to how my brain works operating a camera by hand. But to try to keep it somewhat fair, I tried to spend no more than 10 to 15 seconds setting up my manual shots on the DSLR. However, for the sake of this somewhat loose experiment, I decided to do something different. On this photo, I skipped all of Apple's automatic magic and I went full manual using Adobe Lightroom on my phone. One is shot in RAW, one is shot in JPEG. Using the JPEG mode, we're getting a little bit of that impressionist painting look again, so it must be applying some kind of compression or other post-processing that I'm not fully aware of, but I can see it happening, because in the RAW, exact same settings taken like within seconds of the other photo, or vice versa, we see that noise, but we don't see that splotchiness because it's raw. And the cool thing is, with a little bit of correction, we can actually make that raw photo look pretty dang good. That flower looks really beautiful. And that was shot on this iPhone 11 Pro, but using the raw mode inside of Lightroom, not Apple's automatic camera app. And then I took the photo, made some adjustments inside of Lightroom with exposure, highlight, shadows, vibrance, and noise reduction. And that looks pretty freaking good for a cell phone photo. Here's another example with something that's not a flower, but a bird instead. iPhone 11 Pro and the Canon 7D Mark II. Let's zoom in. You'll see we're getting that painting look again around the details of the eye and those feathers on the 11 Pro, but on the Canon, those details are preserved. Here's another example with some more flowers, and I want to point out another thing here too. You'll notice on the Canon 7D photo, the background is blurred out a lot more. The bokeh, the blurriness, is way bigger than on the 11 Pro. This Canon has a really big well, that's the mirror, but imagine the mirror was up. There's a really big sensor on the inside of this thing that is ginormous compared to the tiny little sensors inside of this guy. The bigger the sensor, the bigger the bokeh. And yes, the focal lengths were identical, give or take a millimeter or two. So that is why the optical depth of field looks so much bigger, that it looks so much more shallow, excuse me, on the DSLR photo compared to the iPhone photo. Now yes, the iPhone has that awesome portrait mode, which multiple cameras can work together with software to computationally blur out the background through magical software. It can be kind of finicky at times, but if your subject is framed right, the effect works really well, and I'll show you that in a moment. Let's zoom in here again. As you see, you get some of that like fringiness and splotchiness, even especially with the out of focus parts on the grass. You can really see that kind of painting effect kicking in there, whereas on the Canon photo, those fine details are preserved. So let's move to a different aspect. Let's talk about dynamic range for a second. I took my trusty old iPhone 7 and pitted it against the iPhone 11 Pro, again with automatic settings inside of Apple's camera app. So one, with the iPhone 7, has no HDR, and the iPhone 11 Pro has Smart HDR Generation 2 kicking in. And as you'll notice, it looks like we were able to preserve quite a bit of that sky in there and that color in the iPhone 11 Pro photo. The one thing that threw me off, though, is that those leaves look now like overly fake. So it's almost like the HDR effect, in my opinion, was like going a little too strong there. You can turn it off in the settings though if you wish. So now I'm gonna do some portrait tests, and I am here with my beautiful, willing, volunteering, sober, unhypnotized subjects. Am I right? Yeah, no way. Exactly, so they're gonna help me out, and we're gonna do some tests with the phone in the portrait mode and in the non-portrait mode and compare it to the DSLR. Let's see what the results are like. So here I have the same photo, but one of them has portrait mode enabled at f4.5 and one of them has portrait mode disabled. I'm going to compare that now to my DSLR shot with no editing. So the DSLR shot is raw. That's why it looks kind of flat and bland. No editing has been done. Right off the bat, you can see we're getting a really nice depth of field with that software depth of field on the 11 Pro, and also the sky is blue and rich and it's not blown out like it is on the 7D Mark II, which also keep in mind is a slightly older DSLR. Let's make a couple adjustments to the raw data to try to match it, and as you can see, it's getting much closer because we have that raw data we can edit with. But again, you have to know how the data works and you have to know how to manipulate it to get that photo. Most consumers won't know how to do that, which is totally fine. For you, the iPhone will do the work. Let's zoom in here and take a look at the detail. You'll notice, and keep in mind, the green grass is not showing too much in my DSLR photo because I had the camera angled a little bit differently. It wasn't blown out, I just had it angled differently. You also notice around the subject's ear in the Canon photo, you're getting a bit of a green fringe. That's a chroma aberration, and it's more likely to happen with certain lenses on DSLRs. You probably will never see that on a cell phone photo. Yeah, overall, the iPhone 11 Pro photo is really clean. And another nice thing is, because that depth of field is being processed in software, any noise that is in the background is gonna get suppressed by that blur effect it's applying. So the photo overall is gonna look a lot cleaner. I'm actually kind of blown away by how well that works. I'm really impressed with that. Okay, so now before we move on to the next thing, I kind of wanna test your wit a little bit. I'm gonna show you a couple photos and you guess whether or not they were taken with the iPhone or with the Canon. So, here's another subject I photographed. iPhone or Canon? What do you think? It was the iPhone. Yes, did you get it right? Well, I hope you did. If you didn't, that's okay too. All right, now let's take a look at this beautiful Jaguar. Yes, look at that. Beautiful color, beautiful exposures. What was that shot with? Boom, iPhone 11 Pro. Only a little bit of editing was done to that photo, but for the most part, that was right off the iPhone 11 Pro. How about these raccoons kind of fighting over an apple? What do you think? Yep, that one was done with the Canon 7D Mark II. What about these delicious hot peppers, where if you eat them, I'm sure your stomach would burst into flames? iPhone or DSLR? That one was with the iPhone, and if you look really closely, you'll see that kind of splotchy painting effect going on with the details in the peppers and in the wood texture. So that's kind of the tell that it is an iPhone photo. What about this comfortable looking fox? Just sleeping, having a good time. There's a couple giveaways. What do you think? Yep, it is the 7D Mark II. The main giveaway, in my opinion, would be the focal length. This is a very tight photo. The iPhone 11, even the telephoto lens, cannot get that tight. I believe that was shot at 135, which is what this lens goes to. So that is the one main giveaway there, and also that bokeh in the background would be relatively hard to achieve, at least optically, on a cell phone. What about this one? This one has pretty clean look. It's not too noisy. It's got a nice shallow depth of field. That was shot with the DSLR, right? Nope! That was actually shot with the iPhone 11 Pro, optically. No portrait mode was turned on for that. And you're more likely to get better bokeh optically with the telephoto lens, because if your aperture is consistent and you tighten the shot, your bokeh is gonna get a bit bigger. So if you wanna do optical depth of field, go tight with that telephoto lens. All right, so now let's move into some night mode stuff. So this is kind of fun. I haven't had a lot of practical uses for night mode yet, but I'm sure it'll happen eventually. I've only had the phone for a week. So I took a photo of some stars with the night mode enabled on my phone, and then with long exposure and high ISO enabled on my DSLR. And to keep it fair, I handheld both of them. Surprisingly, the night mode was able to stabilize the shot really well. On my DSLR, I had to keep the shutter open for at least a second to try to get those stars in there, and because there is no magical stabilization like in the iPhone, the stars got really streaky, so the night mode worked relatively well there. It's a little noisy, but at least there's no shutter lag. Here's another sample. I did some edits to the temperature, exposures, highlight, shadows, noise reduction inside of Lightroom, but this was another night mode shot of some stars. And you'll see with the trees in the foreground there, we lose a lot of that detail, but you get a lot of the low light stuff exposed. So it's not perfect, but it's still pretty remarkable technology, especially in a consumer device where you just press a button and it does the thing. So pretty impressive. However, there's a couple other great things. This is actually with night mode turned off. Hardly any light was in the scene. It still looks pretty good. 640 ISO, 133 exposure time. It was exposed for a 30th of a second. No shutter lag or any of that stuff. It looks pretty freaking nice. No night mode enabled. Here's another one. No night mode enabled at all. It was able to pick up those colors and those lights and looks pretty darn clean. So good job, iPhone. Again, this is an unfair comparison, but it's supposed to be. I'm just showing you what the differences are. In my opinion, the iPhone 11 Pro's strong points are, it has amazing portrait photography. It has fast automatic settings, the Smart HDR Generation 2 is pretty nice, the stabilization for video and night mode is astounding, and it fits in your pocket. Like, your best camera is the one you have with you, so if a moment happens, this is gonna be in your pocket. This probably won't be, so keep that in mind too. And it's easy to use, and another nice thing is, you get that ultra-wide lens for a really low cost. I know I didn't talk about that too much, but getting an ultra-wide lens on something like a DSLR is pretty expensive. The fact that that's built into this phone is a really nice feature. So use that to your advantage. Use that to not just get more in the frame, but to be artistic. The weaker points are the noise and the loss of detail in those small areas we looked at earlier. And we don't get the same type of depth of field effect optically because the sensor is really small, but keep in mind you have that portrait mode effect where if you can get that to work, you can make some bokeh look pretty nice in your photos. For DSLR, the strong points are the detail preservation, post-production flexibility with raw data, but again, you need to know how the raw data works, otherwise it's useless to you. You have more lens options because they are interchangeable, but again, that will come at a cost. That's something you will have to decide if it works for your lifestyle or not. You get that optical depth of field, and you have more manual controls, which help you get the composition that you want, but you have to know how those controls work. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to use them properly. The weak points, it doesn't fit in your pocket, usually, and it's unusable or unaffordable to most consumers. And again, the best camera is the one you have with you. So if you can't afford this or you don't want to carry it around too much, this may not be the option for you. You could stick with an iPhone 11 Pro and it's pretty freaking great. Heck, maybe this is enough to replace that point and shoot you may carry around. So that is what I wanted to show you today. And you'll have to take a look at this stuff, cross-reference it with your lifestyle, and see how it works. Maybe you'll upgrade to something, maybe you'll keep something, maybe you'll change to a totally different solution. Every person will have different needs. I'm not here to show you what's best, I'm just here to show you what's different. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below, and feel free to give the video a rewatch to get more information under your belt, and the full res samples are in the link in the description as well, so please check those out. I hope you learned something, I hope you enjoyed. Catch the crazy, and pass it on.